Welcome to the AMATIC 2018 webinar series. We have HILT activities, which are high impact on student learning, little time in class to implement, with Jennifer Kaplan. The sponsoring committee is the Joint Committee of AMATIC and the American Statistical Association. Please note that the views expressed by the presenter are not necessarily the views of AMATIC. Commercial products mentioned by the presenters are not endorsed by AMATIC. McGraw-Hill is our proud sponsor of the webinar series this year. Thank you very much, McGraw-Hill. And I do have a short biography to read about Jennifer. Jennifer J. Kaplan is an associate professor in the Department of Statistics at the University of Georgia. Her main research interests are undergraduate student learning in statistics and the professional development of graduate teaching assistants in statistics. She earned her PhD in the Department of Mathematics at the University of Texas at Austin, where she worked with Yuri Treisman. Yay! Prior to entering graduate school, Dr. Kaplan was a high school mathematics teacher for 10 years in the Boston area and international schools in Istanbul, Turkey, and Caracas, Venezuela. Currently, Dr. Kaplan lives in Athens, Georgia, with 3 15-year-old cats. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn this right over to Jennifer and let her get going today.
All right, and now I am going to share my screen, which works so well in practice. Let's see if it works well in reality. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, fabulous, thank you. So I'm going to talk today about work I've been doing. We started this project 11 years ago. Joint work with Neil Rogness at Grand Valley State University. Previously on the project, Diane Fisher, who was at Louisiana Lafayette, worked with us. But she retired a few years ago, so Neil and I carry on in her absence. I'm going to introduce you to what we call the HILT-LAS project. I'm going to talk about some featured words, and then I'm going to explain to you how you can become involved in our project more than just to be using the materials we're producing, for anybody who would be interested in that. So, introduction to the project. In 2007, we were part of a research cluster group that got together at the U.S. Conference on Teaching Statistics. There were 12 faculty members interested in doing statistics education, and we talked during the conference and before the conference and after the conference about research ideas, and our small group, Neil, Diane, and I, said, we really want to do something about words. There are words we use in statistics that we think are problematic. And we're really interested in how we use language in statistics and how the language we use in statistics might impact student learning. Because, I mean, language underlies everything we do in the classroom. I'm always fascinated. I mean, right now I am here in my office in Athens, Georgia, moving my mouth and moving my vocal cords, and ideas are appearing in the heads of people as far away as Hawaii. And all across the country, and we do this in the classroom all the time. We convey the ideas to students through language, and they convey back to us what they've understood through language. But if the words we are using as instructors don't have the same meaning for our students, how can we be sure that the ideas that they've developed are the ones we want them to develop? And when they're communicating back, they may think they're communicating back correctly, but because of the words they're using don't mean the same thing to us, we don't think they understand the material. There are a couple of other issues. The use of jargon in science has been shown to be a barrier for entry to students, particularly for underrepresented minorities. And people are known, cognitive science tells us that our students don't come to us with empty heads. Our students do try to connect what we say to things that are in their heads. So when we use some common words that have different meaning in statistics than their everyday meaning, students may be misconnecting ideas in their head. And so these are all sort of the interactions that we have, language and our teaching and our students learning. And we were interested to try to pull apart the issues that language might have for students. So for a while we were talking about, we want to study words, we want to study vocabulary, we want to study language, and then we found out that there was actually a technical term called lexical ambiguity, and that helped us to find other research in the same area. And so words are lexically ambiguous when, for example, they have multiple meanings. So homonyms and homophones, words that are spelled the same but have different meanings, or spelled differently and have different meanings, those are very common examples of lexically ambiguous words. There, and there. And, you know, in mathematics, pi and pie, you know, the word pie and the pie we eat. So again, young children can understand that two words that sound the same can have different meanings. So, and there are techniques within language acquisition for helping young learners understand the difference between words. And so the idea, some of the ideas that underlie our projects are to think about the words that we use that may be common everyday English words, but have domain-specific meaning in statistics. How do we help the sort of older learners, our undergraduate students, see the differences between these words without treating them like they're kindergartners learning about homonyms and homophones? And so some of the key techniques are to specifically address the differences, to contrast the meanings of the words, and to allow the students to develop their own voices, to give students opportunities to use the language, and then watch to make sure, or listen to make sure, that they're using the words correctly. The other piece of the project that we've been really cognizant of is most people who teach an introduction to statistics class in one semester feel like we already have too much to teach in one semester, and how do I have time for any more? So when we're thinking about how do we address the issue of lexical ambiguity in the classroom, we're not thinking about, you know, adding a whole bunch of extra stuff to the curriculum. These HILT activities that I'm going to talk about that address lexical ambiguities, they're supposed to have high impact on student learning, but take little time in the class. And so they're designed to be short activities that have high impact in student learning. So those are sort of the ideas that underlie the project and going forward. So at some point we sat down, a group of us, and brainstormed words and statistics that we thought were potentially lexically ambiguous. And we stopped when we got to about 30 words. Wait, this might be a more than 30 word. But at some point we stopped. This is not to say that these are the only words that have lexical ambiguity, but these were, you know, this is sort of what we came up with. This graphic is color-coded based on data we've collected over time, words for which we have some HILT activities. So anything that has any gray in it, we've actually developed a HILT activity to address that word. The words that have the reddish, that's actually bulldog red from Georgia, but not quite as saturated. That's why it looks so pink. But the red words were the first words we studied, and we have a paper on those words, 2 papers on those words that have been published. And at the end of the slides, I have references to those papers if anybody wants to read them. The words in blue were our second set of words, and we have some data collection that's gone on those words. And then the other words in gray, sort of haphazardly scattered around the diagram, are words that instructors have been interested enough in to create activities for those words, HILT activities. So again, the desirable characteristics of the activities are that they'll help students understand the language that we use, that they're easily incorporated into class with a minimal investment in time, and we call them HILT, high impact, little time. We have had an NSF funded project. The number of the project is on some of the slides because we do that so we can make sure that we're properly identifying the funding. But the specific aims were to create and implement HILT activities and to research and document differences in student learning outcomes associated with the classroom use of the HILT activities. And the way we measure the effectiveness, we do it in 2 ways. One, we measure how students define the words, what they write about the words, but we also have started asking content questions. There was a point in the early stages of the project when people were saying, well, it's all well and good if they understand the vocabulary better, but do they really understand the statistical idea better as well? And so we try to test both of those things. Can the students give a more statistical definition for the statistical term, and does it matter in terms of what they know about the statistics content associated with the word? And so we have data collection in a lot of points in the research project. When we identify a potentially lexically ambiguous word, we start by collecting data from students as to how they define the word in their everyday life. So at the beginning of the semester, we may ask students to write a sentence and a definition for a particular target word, and we use the definitions that come up from the students to know how students are using the word before a statistics class. Sometimes we'll collect data at the end of a statistics class that doesn't use a HILT activity to see how the students define the word statistically at the end of the semester, and whether they're just doing a good job and this isn't really a lexically ambiguous word or a word that's problematic, or to find out where the problems are, how close the students are getting to a statistical definition. And then once we have an activity, we do a post-activity data collection from students who were in classes that used the activity and students who were in classes that did not use the activity, preferably at the same institution. And so we have the HILT students and the non-HILT students, and we compare the definitions and the results of content questions between the HILT group, the students in the HILT group, and the students not in the HILT group. All right, so that's the background. Julie, do we have questions on that before I sort of show the work we did with the featured word pair, parameter, and statistic?
So nothing has come in yet. No questions have come in yet.
All right, so let me pause and give a little bit of wait time in case anybody had questions about the background that they want to type. Still no? All right, we go on. So I'm going to talk now about the word pair, parameter, and statistic. Okay, the slides get really colorful, and hopefully they don't get too dense. I'm just going to say I have a lot of tables that look like this. This is an RGB, a Roy G. Biv. It's the rainbow spectrum. Typically, no, for all of the graphics that are going to come up for the rest of the presentation, we've put what we consider to be better answers, more statistical answers at the bottom. They'll come up in the purples and the blues, and the answers that we're less happy about come up at the top, so those will be in the yellows, oranges, and reds. So, and that'll be sort of for the rest, that's the convention, the color and organizational convention for all of the graphics that come up in the slides. So I use JUMP. This is sort of one of the stock JUMP ways of doing colors. So this is the coding rubric for student responses when we ask them to define the word parameter. And so, and this is, we have a rubric for, we're hoping that they're talking about it statistically, but we do sometimes ask this question at the beginning of the semester and at the end of the semester. So we have students who will give a correct, and I do have on the next slides, I do have some examples, but there's the correct statistical definition that it's a summary characteristic of the population. We have students who name a specific parameter like the population mean. We get some incomplete, but tending toward the statistical. We have students who give us the correct definition for a statistic when we've asked them to define parameter. Students who talk about the population, the sample, or the data. We get some colloquial definitions. students who define a variable, and we do in fact see students who give us an excellent definition of perimeter. It's the area around a figure. It's not so surprising. Some of those look a lot like the colloquial definitions, boundaries, right? The perimeter is the measure of the boundary, and the colloquial definition for parameter, it can be a boundary condition. So we have some sample, these are some sample responses of what constitutes the various categories. So correct statistical, a numerical value summarizing the population data, a numerical characteristic of a population, some examples of specific parameters, the population mean, a population proportion, a population standard deviation, the more incomplete statistical definitions, information about a population. It's not quite as specific as it's a numerical value, but clearly it's something about the population. I just sort of like this one. A parameter is a value that does not change. I mean, it's great when students recognize that. We just didn't consider that to be complete enough, but it is a really nice observation. Then, you know, really nice definitions of statistics, a numerical measurement of one set of data. A statistic, it's a synonym of a statistic. So that's really very specific, that they think that this student has parameter and statistic mixed up in their mind or allied in their mind. Again, we see a parameter is the data, a parameter is the population, a parameter is the sample. So we've got the parameter as a numerical value. So that's, if we go back to the incomplete statistical, a parameter is information about the population, but to be correct statistical, we really want to see being a numeric value. Here we've got the numeric value, but not about a population. So we call that a variable, something measurable, some kind of numeric summary. And again, these really are lifted from student responses. We didn't make these up. But the parameter is the circumference of a region, the outside length of an object. And now here are some colloquial definitions. A characteristic or a feature, a measurable factor that defines a system, criteria or requirements. It's a way in which a statistician chooses who's going to be in the group. So it's the criterion for entry, where you can obtain your data, a defined set of possible outcomes, the minimum and the maximum, that in order for something to be included, it has to be in that interval. It has to meet the boundary conditions. So those are sort of the colloquial, you know, what are the conditions? So this is the distribution at the beginning, at the end of the semester of students who didn't have a HILT activity. And there are over 1,000 student responses in this data set. So these aren't bad. I mean, you know, more students were able to give a correct statistical definition at the end of the semester than at the beginning of the semester. Unfortunately, we really only have about half the students giving us something at the end of the semester that is approaching a good statistical definition. We do have fewer people, fewer students at the end, a smaller proportion of students at the end in the perimeter, parameter, variable categories, but a similar proportion are still giving colloquial definitions. And so we hope we can do better with a HILT activity. And I'm doing a word pair. The activities that we have for parameter are really for the parameter and statistics word pair. So this is the coding rubric for statistic. So again, from bottom to top, we've got correct statistical, and these categories are not dissimilar from the categories for parameter. So you'll notice that we do have a category where students give us a really nice definition of parameter when we've asked us to define statistic, but we've got the correct statistical definition of statistic. They've given us a specific statistic like the sample proportion or the sample mean. Students will define statistics, the discipline. It's the art and science of making meaning from data. Then they'll tell us that a statistic is a piece of information. Again, we've got this category that it's an observation or the sample or the data. There are students who will tell us that a statistic is something we need for inference. They'll name a statistic like Michael Jordan's shooting percentage, and we call that different from being a specific statistic. If they tell us about somebody's batting average, we call that a named statistic. If they're talking about a specific statistical statistic, a specific value that came out of a sample, that's where we get to specific statistic. And again, they'll define a parameter instead of a statistic. So here are some examples from each of the categories. A numeric value summarizing the sample data, that's correct statistical. The sample average, the sample proportion, some definition of the word statistics as a discipline. It's a fun class that you learn a lot in. We need to see that more. Parameter, they define parameter. It's a numerical value summarizing the population. Great definition of parameter, not what we asked. So clear definition of a sample, it's the results that were recorded from the sample, a statistic, or it is the sample itself. Name statistics, so I don't know who thinks Michael Jordan's shooting percentage is 0.04%, but a student really wrote that. And the percentage of girls who are in the stat class. And then the inference, a statistic is a proportion of a sample used to make an inference about a larger population. Collecting and analyzing data to infer something. Data provided from tests perform on a sample. So they really do sort of hone in on the use of a statistic for inference. So this information is sort of the colloquial use that a statistic is some piece of information, it's some fact. It's a way of representing data, an organized collection of analyzed data. So that's the information category, which is a bit more colloquial, a little bit less focused than the way we use the word statistic technically in statistics. And again, these were the data that we collected to try to inform the project as to how students use the word statistic at the beginning of the semester and how they define it at the end of the semester. And frankly, these, show a lot less movement towards being able to correctly define the word statistic in the technical sense at the end of the semester. Students are still sort of being a little bit more colloquial, talking about a statistic being a piece of information, and also talking about, they're more likely to talk about the statistic being the sample, the data, or the observations, although they are less likely to talk about the discipline of statistics, and a little bit less likely to give some of those sort of named statistics and parameter definitions. All right. So now I'm going to show you a video. So what we did was, I'll talk about this a little bit more. We had some HILT faculty create activities and use them in their classes. And we had the technology for them to video the classes. So there'll be a little box with the instructor at the bottom, and you'll see the slides in the background, and you'll be able to hear the instructor. So you'll be able to see what we call the all versus small activity for parameter and statistic, and so that you can get a sense of what a HILT activity looks like that was designed once the instructors knew about these issues. So I'm going to do a new share. And I have to click that box and click this box and share screen. And now we will pop it out and we will play it. And it's quiet for a little while.
So I want to talk about something that we talked about briefly, and get it more solidly in our minds. So we have talked about population. So I just want to go over that and just make sure we're clear. Population, for example, all of the people in the United States would be an example of a population, or all of the apples in an orchard be another kind of an example. Could be talking about all of the penguins in a region. And then we've mentioned sample before. So we want to identify sample would be a small group of people in the United States. It doesn't have to be this small, but a smaller group than all of the people in the United States. Or a small basket of apples from the orchard. Or a small group of penguins from the region. Okay, so population, we want to think of as the all, the big group, all. And sample, think of as the small group. So the all versus the small, population versus the sample. So take a minute, you have your notes taking paper, take a minute and look at this question, again, this statement. What is the parameter for determining if someone is overweight? And tell me what's the best meaning for the word parameter in that sentence. The range where all possible answers fall, the total outside length, a limit, boundary, rule, or the whole population being described. Just make a little note on your note-taking paper. What do you think is the best meaning in that sentence for the word parameter? What is the parameter for determining if someone is overweight? Next, I want you to look at this sentence. The parameter for mean GPA was 2.86. And I want you to tell me what's the best meaning for parameter as it's used in that sentence. The parameter for mean GPA was 2.86. Is it A, a measure of proportion, B, a collection of data from a population, C, the total outside length, D, a numerical characteristic of a population? Just take a minute and write that down to your choice of the best meaning for parameter as used in that sentence. And you've had parameter briefly introduced to you in your reading, and we mentioned it in passing a little bit, so it's not a completely new. We want to just delve into it and make sure that we get clear. So, best choice from that sentence. So, for the first sentence that we had, this is from the colloquial definition for parameter. We use parameter in conversation in ways that are different than how we use it statistically sometimes. So this is the conversational version, the colloquial version. So we're talking in this case about a limit, boundary, or rule. What's the parameter for determining if someone is overweight? What's the cutoff point, the limit of where you would define that? That's how parameter is being used in that sentence. That's the way you may have heard it used just in conversation till now. And when we're saying the parameter for mean GPA was 2.86, this is a sentence that's trying to get to the statistical definition of it. In that case, we're talking about a numerical characteristic of a population, okay? Some summary numerically of a population. That's how we use parameter in statistics. So we want to differentiate how you may have thought of it before conversationally in the everyday usage versus what it means in statistics to us. Okay, so in statistics, Parameter is a numerical characteristic of a population. So back to population and sample. Population is the all, sample is the small. If we say, what is the mean penguin weight for all penguins who live in Antarctica? That numerical value, if you put a numerical value to it, that numerical value is called a parameter. Okay, as we just discussed. So now I'm just going to shift over and say, without going through the finding a definition from a sentence like we just did for parameter, statistic is to sample as parameter is to population. Okay, so when we look at the sample or the small, what's the mean penguin weight for a sample of 12 penguins who live in Antarctica? Then that numerical value would be called a statistic. Okay? So parameters are numerical summaries of populations. Statistics are numerical summaries of samples. That's what we want to get clear in our mind. And I think I briefly mentioned to you very nicely one way to help you recall that is both population and parameter start with a P. Okay, so when you're learning, sometimes it's hard to keep it straight. It's always nice to have something to help cue you to which one is it. Sample and statistic both start with an S. So some numerical characteristic of the population, a parameter. A numerical characteristic of the sample, a statistic. So, for instance, when we say parameters and statistics, the population parameter, a numerical value about the all, sample statistic, a numerical value about the small. So we can say the mean IQ of all people in the United States, that's a parameter. Mean IQ of 30 people in the United States, that's a statistic. And so on. The percentage of all apples in the orchard that are bruised or discolored, that's a parameter. The percentage of 100 apples in the orchard that are bruised or discolored from a sample, that makes it a statistic. The mean weight of all king penguins in Antarctica, that's a parameter. We're talking about the all. The mean weight of 12 king penguins in Antarctica, that's a statistic. We're talking about the small group.
So I'm going to go back to my slides now. So that's an example of one of the activities that's been created and the enactment of it in a class for this word pair, parameter and statistic. There's actually a second activity for parameter and statistic. I'm only going to show this one today. But now I will show you how the students did. And again, there's a second activity for parameter and statistics, so there are actually 3 groups of students on some of these slides. So our content question, we had a multiple choice question that we put on final exams, and the question was, the mean GPA of all students at GVSU is an example of A, and the choices were parameter, population, sample, and statistic. Where the blue parameter is the correct answer. And the students, so all versus small is the narrow slice in the middle. Candy is the other, there's a candy jar activity, that's the other activity. The comparison, those are other students who took the same type of course, the same course at Grand Valley, but with a non-HILT instructor. And you see that our HILT students were more likely to correctly answer this content question about parameter and statistic. In terms of the definitions that they wrote, again, and they are small samples. This is 104 as compared to the 1,000 we had when we were doing the initial data collection. But again, the HILT students, that purple and the blue are correct statistical definitions and giving a specific parameter like the population proportion or the population mean. And then that next teal color up is something incomplete in statistical, so it might be something like a numerical summary, or it might be something, it's information about the population. So they're getting there. And that's, when you combine those three categories, the HILT students, 75% of them were in that category, whereas closer to 50% for the comparison. We don't do inference on these. I mean, this is sort of pilot data. These are descriptive statistics. We're not doing inference on how well did these activities work, because we know there are a lot of other factors in classrooms that may have affected the students. But we like to think that, the HILT instructors and the activities had something to do with this difference. Here's the definition of statistic. Again, we see that about 70% of the students of the HILT students are giving a correct statistical definition or identifying a specific statistic. That number is closer to a half for the comparison students. And the other thing about HILT, we say high impact, little time. What's the time? So this is across all of the activities that the group of faculty at Grand Valley created. When we surveyed them about how much time they needed to implement, they all indicated that it was not too much or too little, it was about right. And the estimates of the amount of time to introduce the activity, which is what you saw in the video, and then provide reminders. So we made note of somewhat regularly how often the instructors referred back to an activity later in the semester. So that varied from about 5 to 15 minutes for each activity, mean of 9.4 minutes with a standard deviation of 3.8 minutes. So that's when we talk about little time, we're talking about things that take up 10 minutes of time during the whole semester. And I will stop there to see if anybody has questions before I tell you a little bit about how we work with the instructors.
So there was a question that came through a little bit earlier. I think it was back when you were talking about like the beginning of the semester to the end. It said, how soon into the beginning of the semester in weeks do you ask for the definitions? So when you're comparing beginning and end, is it literally the beginning and the end of the semester?
Yeah, so quite the data that we collect before we've created a HILT activity in order to sort of figure out what students are thinking about these words before they take a statistics class, that's usually the first week of the semester. We usually embed it in, a lot of those data were collected at Georgia, and sometimes we embed that in, we use WebAssign as our course management system. So there's usually like a sort of syllabus quiz type thing, and getting them used to how to answer using WebAssign, and a lot of times we'll embed it in that. So they may have had a couple of classes, but it's typically during the first week.
Okay, thanks.
Has anything else come in?
Nope, not yet.
All right. So on our project, we created a faculty learning community style professional development. It ran for 2 academic years. We had 6 faculty members. They participated in 2 summer workshops, one before the start of the first year and one in between years 1 and 2. And then we met every other week with them. My colleague Neil was physically in the room, and we used a platform like this. We actually used Blackboard Collaborate. So they had a camera and I had a camera so we could participate together. In the first semester, the HILT instructors classroom tested the zebra hat activity. I didn't have time to show you that today, but it's an activity that I had created previously as proof of concept. And then in the second semester, they classroom tested their own HILT activities that they had been working on in the fall. And in the fall of the second year, they swapped activities with each other and adapted other people's activities for use in their own classes, because we do not expect that instructors will use activities exactly the way somebody else made them, but that they will be adapted for use in the particular situation. And so the HILT instructors had an opportunity to use somebody else's activity, and we again captured video to see how the activity became different, and we collected data from the students to see whether other instructors had similar or different outcomes. We then did a workshop at the beginning of the U.S. Conference on Teaching Statistics last summer, and we identified a small group of instructors self-identified as being interested in joining the project, and we ran what we call it the OFLC, the Online Faculty Learning Community, which we ran this last year. We met online every 2 weeks in the fall while these faculty members were implementing one of the activities that was already available and thinking about the design of a new activity for a new set of words. We also helped them with human subjects protocols at their institutions so that we could collect data from students at their institutions once they were piloting their own activities. In the spring, we didn't meet quite as often because there's no need to meet if we don't have anything to talk about, but we did meet to make sure that the activities were ready, to give feedback on activities, to organize the data collection, and then when the data started coming in, to look at the data that were coming in. I should have switched over the slide before I said all of that. The words that they were interested were significant or significance and variable or variance. We do have an activity for significant, and we did do some data collection from the institutions of the two instructors who used that activity. So I'm going to show you the activity. It's much shorter than the other one, but share the computer sound. And
what are the chances? This video is intended to help you to understand the meaning of the word significant when used in statistics. There are several meanings for the word significant that we use every day. Significant can mean special or important, as in a significant other. Or we could mean large or noticeable, as in a significant crowd at the concert. We can mean important or noteworthy, like these monuments that commemorate a significant person or event. Significant can mean excellent or unusually good, high quality, such as winning a medal at the Olympics as a significant achievement. But in statistics, the word significant means something particular. It means that it is unlikely to happen by chance.
And I will now come back to my slides. So that activity was created by two faculty members, one who teaches online, and so that was the video she made to put in the course management system at her institution. I don't have the data. The definitions that appeared on those slides were based on definitions that students wrote for the word significant at the beginning of the semester. We haven't had a chance to look at the data that have come in, and we're rolling this out a little bit rolling because one of the institutions using the activity, they have funny semesters, so we'll be collecting. They're an online institution, so we'll be collecting data over time from that. So we had such a good time with our first OFLC that we'd love to continue it. We did a workshop before the electronic conference on teaching statistics, which if you are interested in talks like this, but did not participate in the electronic conference on teaching statistics, ECOTS, if you go to causeweb.org, ECOTS, there should be archived videos of all the ECOTS talks. At some point they will be free, Registering for ECOTS was $15, so, or $20, so you may be able to pay your $20 to see them, but if you wait, they will be free. We've proposed to continue our online FLC, and we are glad to be recruiting members. So if you're interested, I have contact information, I think, on the next slide. But the idea is over this summer, identifying more people who might be interested in becoming HILT instructors. And you don't have to be a HILT instructor to use our materials, but if you want to help create more, we'd be glad to have you. And we'll continue running these online collaborative groups where, you know, 4 or 5 people get together every other week to talk about issues with vocabulary and how can we target new words, and with the hope that people would use some of the activities in fall and create new activities that could be piloted so at Grand Valley they call it winter semester because they don't lie about the fact that that semester is winter in Michigan, whereas most of us call it spring semester. But you know, we'd be glad to have people if they're interested. We had a really good time working, even, you know, even without the face-to-face, and so we'd like to continue this. So if you're interested, we didn't need a poll question for that. If you're interested in being part of our OFLC, please feel free to email me and let me know, and we'll be contacting people in the last half of July to sort of get things set up for August when most people start back fall semester. Now let me talk about, just for a minute, I want to leave a few minutes for questions if there are any. So one of the parts of our proposals was we were making a Wikispace, and we did that, and we have a Wikispace, and all of the activities that have been developed, well, except the last one that you saw, have been loaded in the Wikispace, so you can download slides, you can download, you can watch videos of instructors doing the activities in their own classes. We have some of the results are posted, some of the rationale for why the activities were designed the way they were there. Unfortunately, Wikispaces is closing down as of July 31st. So if you want to go look through and download slides, you need to do that by July 31st. I am leaving everything there so that people can do that, but we haven't quite found the new home for the HILT activities, but so they are still there. But you have to remember not to do it. You can't do it in August. I mean, you can email me in August and say, can I get the slides? But if you want to go sort of look through what's there, you have to put that on your calendar before July 31st. The slides have references. I also have all of where the significant activity graphics came from, and these are the project team publications if anybody wants to go read any of the things we've published on the work. Thank you to all the instructors who've been helping us create the activities, both the OFLC members and the Grand Valley HILT instructors. We had an undergraduate on the project, and we've had, Neil calls them my army of graduate students who've worked on this project. Oh, that's the wrong logo, and I forgot to change it. And that was it. Sorry, I forgot to hide the other slides. Are there questions?
So somebody just asked, can you post the slides on the Wikispaces site? If you send them to me, you send maybe a PDF copy of it, I can put them on the AMATIC site for you.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
Will that satisfy the person who was asking?
I think so. I think usually people just want, you know, want a way to connect with the webinar. So someone raised their hand, and you can just put your question in the chat box unless you want me to give you audio rights. Let me know that in the chat as well. Again, if you have any questions, let's go ahead and put those in the question and answer box. That'd be awesome. I don't think I can put your hand down for you either. I think it will just stay up until you lower it. Let's Let's see. Okay. See if anything else comes in here. I don't want to cut you off. I do have a little tidying up to do with my slides and my ending of the webinar. Why don't we keep Jennifer on the line, and I'll do my little spiel to end, and then if we see something that comes through, we will figure that out. So back to mine. I'd like to thank you all for participating in today's AMATIC webinar. If you'd like to support future webinars, please consider joining AMATIC, and you can go to bit.ly/join-AMATIC. We are on social media, and Facebook in particular. You also have your regions have got Facebook pages now, so check that out. Recordings of past AMATIC webinars can be found at bit.ly/AMATIC-webinars, and it typically takes us about 1 to 2 weeks to produce and upload and archive webinars such as today's. Please take 2 minutes to evaluate the webinar content and the presenter. You can either zap the QR code that I have down there in the bottom, or you can go to bit.ly/AMATIC72. In just a moment, I will put that in the chat window. And there's tons of stuff coming into the chat. So I probably need to read that again as well.
I've got it. I'm on it. You talk. I'm on it.
You're on it. You're typing, huh? Okay, sounds great. Sounds great. Let's see. Here is that webinar survey. Are there any questions that you wanted to part of the recording? Or you're just typing responses back?
Well, I can actually, there was one question that it would be easier for me to answer verbally than to type.
Okay, go for it.
And
what was the question?
The question was, how much time, what's the time commitment if you wanted to be in the OFLC? Last year, the group met every other week for an hour, starting, I can't remember if it was mid-August or early September through first semester. And we discussed the words that we were interested in. We collected some data from students, their own sentences about definitions of those words, and then created the activities. So I can't tell you how much time the instructors spent in between meetings thinking about the activities, but it was every other week for an hour meeting, and then they would draft slides or draft activities, and then we'd talk about them. In the spring, we met probably in January and February. We were meeting to talk about data collection and human subjects, and so the instructors spent some time doing those activities outside of the meetings. And then there were probably 6 weeks where we didn't meet at all until we had some data to look at from students. So hopefully that gives you a sense of how much time it was.
Okay. Well, your results certainly look like it's worth the time, right?
We like to think so.
Yeah, absolutely.
We hope, we like to get as many people drinking our brand of Kool-Aid as possible.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I really think that apart from anything else we do, just realizing how important language is and how important it is to be careful about our language makes a huge difference. So for example, when I talk with other statisticians, I'll often self-correct. If a statistician says something about a standard deviation and I know that person is talking about a standard error of a statistic, I'm not going to stop another statistician and say, don't you mean standard error? I'm just going to say, yeah, that whatever. But if we don't self-correct or correct students when they make that mistake, they may really, the students may not be getting the right message. And so we really have to think a lot more carefully about our language when we talk to novices, our students, than we do when we talk to each other.
Right.
Thanks, Joanne.
Oh, yeah, you see, you read that faster than me, so I had closed the window. That's awesome. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording at this point, but if you'd stay on just for a moment,
Mhm.
make sure that we address any more questions.